and several other things. What is this? A stick. That's really hard, wasn't it? Congrats, you passed the test. And you look at this, you think it's just a stick. In the hands of some, it's nothing more than just a stick. They see it and they think, oh, it's going to chop up it's going to hurt my lawnmower. I got to get rid of it. For others, they're going to see it and say, I'll break it down. I can burn this. This will be really good. Most of them just see it. It's a stick, good for very little. But what if I told you this wasn't just a stick, but something so much more than that? See, you put this in the hands of a child, and it becomes a sword. It becomes a spear. It becomes a staff like Gandalf, ready to fight the forces of evil. It becomes a microphone. It becomes a magic wand. A paddle, a mast of a ship, a fishing pole. All these different things. And the list of what this thing can become is endless as a child's imagination. It's more than just a stick. When we were living in Oregon and Kai was little, I asked his permission for this story. We had these tall, I call them pine trees. My sister, who's in horticulture and arborist, she says they're not pine, they're spruce, I think. But he would bring in all these sticks. And every one was important. Every one was vital to him. And he would turn them into all kinds of things. And in fact, this is one of those sticks he had put his Chiefs flag on for a while and was waving it around. But when we were getting ready to move, we were going through his closet, and we found a lot of sticks. And they were so important to him that we had to wait until he was at school, and so Amy could get them out of the house without him seeing, because he wanted to move to Maine with these sticks. And because they were that important, we couldn't get rid of them. And because he loved the sticks, they were all more than just a stick in his hands. You know, at some point in our lives, sticks stop becoming this thing with endless potential, and they just become sticks. It's just another stick. And I wonder if sometimes we overlook the ordinary parts of our life, the routines, those relationships, those natural skills that we have. We just think they're too common to be anything more than just what they are. They're too common to make much of a difference. They're too common to matter much. But what if we started to be grateful for those sticks in our lives? Those things, those humble things that we don't see as remarkable, but they are essential. They're more than just sticks, these everyday parts of our lives. They become more than ordinary. They become extraordinary when we take them and we surrender them to God. In Exodus 4, we find Moses standing before God. And he's having a conversation, and he's holding his shepherd's staff. And at first glance, it's just this tool that he uses for herding and for walking. But in God's hand, it becomes a symbol of his power. And today, we're going to look at how we can be grateful for these sticks, these common sticks that fill every one of our lives, and how God can use them to transform them for his purpose. See, our job is not to dress up the stick, but to bring the stick. And bring what it is, no matter how ordinary it may seem or how insignificant it might be, to bring it to God with a grateful heart, trusting that God sees what's in our hands and can use it in some amazing ways. And so let's read in Exodus chapter 4, starting at verse 1. And this is what it says. So Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the..." He reached out and took the hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." First, let's acknowledge that God sees potential in the ordinary. God sees potential in the ordinary. Moses' life is one of roller coaster. He once had an identity and a purpose as a prince of Egypt. He once had education and status and the resources to make this phenomenal impact. Yet, after a really rash decision, he fled into the wilderness and he spent the next 40 years as a shepherd, an existence far beyond what he had grown up in, far removed from this royal upbringing. And by the time God called him, Moses had been stripped of his status, he had been stripped of his confidence, he had been stripped of ambition, and there was nothing left in his hands but a stick, a simple staff to herd the animals, to guide sheep, not lead a nation. And as Moses stood before the burning bush, God didn't ask him for a grand gesture. He didn't ask him for impressive qualifications. He simply asked the question, what is in your hand? And Moses had nothing but a staff, a dry, ordinary piece of wood. And yet God revealed that this simple stick, this humble tool, could become a vessel for his power and deliverance. See, God wasn't asking a question about what the stick was. God was asking Moses' willingness to surrender it to God's purpose. It wasn't the stick that mattered, but the God who would use it. By throwing it down as God commanded, Moses symbolically released control of a very important thing in his life. And he trusted God to transform the ordinary into something extraordinary. Now, consider this. The rod just didn't change in appearance or in composition, but in God's hand, it became a snake. It parted the Red Sea. It performed countless miracles. This truth, it reminds us that what we see as ordinary, God often says, no, it's more than that. It's extraordinary when I can use it because you have surrendered it. And so this morning, I want to start with this question for us. What is in your hand? See, this isn't a story just about Moses. It's a story about our life. It's about us. See, like Moses, we often focus on what we lack. I don't have the skills. I don't have the resources. I don't have the confidence, rather than what we already possess. See, God doesn't wait for us to become extraordinary or perfect. He calls us to offer the simple, ordinary sticks that we already hold. You have talents. Do you underestimate those gifts because they seem small and unspectacular? Do you believe that God can use them to build his church, touch hearts, or bring hope to someone in need? Your treasure. Maybe what you have feels insignificant. A few extra dollars, some spare time, a room in your home. Yet in God's hands, these small offerings can multiply and beyond what you could ever imagine them to become. Your time. Perhaps you feel like you don't have much time because life is so overwhelming right now. But it's even the smallest acts of obedience, sharing this kind word, or offering to pray for someone, or volunteering for a small task that can become profound and significant when guided by God. Corrie ten Boom, a Christian writer and Holocaust survivor, once said, "The measure of a life, after all, is not its duration, but its donation." See, this aligns with God's call to Moses. It's not about the perceived worth of something, whatever it might be in our hands. It's about our willingness to give it to God for his use. Moses' rod became powerful because he was willing to donate it, really willing to release it into God's care. And God is still asking, what is in your hand? He's still asking. The question is not whether we have enough, but whether we are willing to let him use what we already have. Remember, it's not about the stick, but the God who wants to use it, the God who wants to transform it. And so I want to challenge us to offer our sticks to God and allow him to use them for his glory. Because see, when we stop hiding and we start surrendering, God's power can transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. And we have to surrender because that's where it starts. And when we surrender what's in our hands to God, he invites us into a journey that challenges us to confront our fears. And like Moses, we may find that the very thing we offer to God becomes something far unfamiliar, and intimidating. But it's in that moment where fear, where God calls us to trust him more deeply. So let's confront the fear to embrace the calling. In Exodus 4:3, God tells Moses to throw down his rod, which immediately becomes a snake. And Moses, understandably, is afraid. I have never seen a stick turn into a snake, and I'm not a huge fan of snakes. I would probably do the same. I would run. And he flees in fear. It tells us that in fear he runs away, and yet God calls him back, and then God tells him to do something that just doesn't make sense. His next instruction is so incredibly more startling. He says, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. Now, I don't know if you know this about snakes, but they have incredible muscular abilities. And I had a buddy who had a boa constrictor. Not a boa, he had a python, a Burmese python, and we would play with it, and when we'd pull it out, and if you grabbed it by the tail, it would whip its head around and wrap around your arm. Because